immediately at 1:30. And then there was another story. I was talking to some political friends yesterday, and I remember there was an MLA here, John Martin, a guy who just lost in the last election, and he called a press conference for 1:30, and I was attending. The Prime Minister was in town in Victoria, and my camera guy had to go shoot what's called pool, which means he shoots for everybody. Trudeau meeting with the mayor. So he dropped me off and I ran back to the legislature, and I got there at 1:28, and John Martin had already started speaking about something. And then he finished and it was very brief. And I said, okay, can you repeat the beginning? I missed it. He goes, no, I'm not going to repeat myself. I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, it's you were early and like you called this press conference. So I started pestering him to repeat himself, and then he left, and then I followed him down the hallway and I kept pestering him, and finally he told me, and it was about an employee who had stolen money from him. And I'm like, what's the big deal about all this? And I walked back, and my colleagues who had seen all of this unfold were laughing hysterically. I'm like, and I was not in a laughing mood. I said, what's so funny? And they're like, he was bawling, crying, and that's why he didn't want to read his statement again, because he was so emotional. And I had missed all of it. So I'm always, I like waiting for things to happen on time.
Yeah, and in Zoom, it's the awkward thing is like these meetings were in person, so we get people were gathering and just chatting and stuff on Zoom. Right. I'm like, so what's going on, people?
Yeah, but today was, I watch obviously the COVID numbers very closely, and I've gained a significant following through Twitter by being first to update those numbers. And today they were an hour and 20 minutes late on the dashboard, and like nearly 2 hours late through the emails. And it's just like, it's getting ridiculous. And they alluded to it yesterday, and I don't fully know what they mean, but it sounds like we may not be getting daily numbers anymore starting pretty soon. That we'll just be getting rolling averages, which like is fine. Like, we'll do the math and you can figure out the new daily toll based on the rolling averages. But like, it seems like it's just an unnecessary step. I hope they actually provide both numbers, which I think if they don't, they'll get pushback, because they don't want people they know that there's a lot of people out there who are hanging on those numbers every day, right? And 650 looks bad and 750 looks worse, and they would rather people just sort of see it as an average, and then we can see if our average is going up or down. But I don't know.
Yeah, it's I was actually curious about those numbers, but now
yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
And there's been technical issues too with the data from Fraser Health, and so that's caused some really weird challenges.
Yeah, that one was quite weird.
Yeah.
Anyway, welcome to eTech number 32 in collaboration with Hamiari Media. Here we have with me Sima Ghafarzadeh, my dear friend, and our other friend Human is also around. He's going to join us at some point. Hamid Ahmadian's helped us with providing the Zoom account so that we were able to record it. We wanted to broadcast it live as well, but unfortunately we were not savvy enough to figure it out in time. So we'll post it later. But here we have 16 people, and people are still joining, so that's good. Yeah, as I always mention, Tech Talk, for the benefit of our new guests and Richard, the purpose of Tech Talk is for people in town to get to know each other, learn about one another's stories, get inspired, and to network. And for a while, I was thinking of having this opportunity with someone like Richard. He's I've been following his work closely, and I read his book as well. So I thought it would be good to have him in this group and chatting with politics with this crowd. So without further ado, I'll go around and ask people to just tell us who they are and what they do. I start with Sanjar, our friend.
Thank you, Amir John. Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Sanjar Swai. I was a journalist for a long time in Afghanistan. I'm still running the biggest daily newspaper of Afghanistan called #. I live in Langley with my 2 kids and my wife. I'm glad to be in this meeting.
Awesome, thanks for coming. And I said sorry, I'm sorry. Sina.
Hi everybody, it's nice to be here, and my name is Sina, and I work for Micro Traffic company in Winnipeg as a machine learning engineer.
Awesome, Mohsen John.
Hi everyone, I'm Mohsen. I'm a civil engineer with a company in Vancouver called Golder Associates.
Awesome, Parvin, if you can hear us.
Yes, hi, my name is Parveen and I'm just woman activist, that's it.
Awesome, Mr. Said, if you can hear us. You're muted, sir.
Yeah. Hi, my name is Said. I live in Vancouver, and I have graduated on electronic. That's it.
All the way to Montreal, I believe, Roya.
Yeah, hi, my name is Roya. I studied sociology and East Asian studies, so that's why maybe politics is an area of interest to me. And I used to work at a law firm, recently moved to Montreal, and that's all. Thank you.
Marco Polo. Mahmoud John.
Hi, my name is Mahmoud. I'm joining from Vancouver. I work in sustainability and greenhouse gas management, and I'm a serial environmental and social entrepreneur.
Awesome. Mehdi.
Hi, everyone. I'm a QC process coordinator in natural factors in Vancouver, and I'm happy to be here with you guys.
Awesome. Mr. or Mrs. EDF, I don't know what your name is, but we would be delighted if you introduce yourself. Not sure if you can.
Hi, everyone. My name is Bijan. Happy to be with you.
All right. Nastaran.
Hi, my name is Nastran. I'm a research scientist working at SFU, and I'm working on energy transition modeling and climate change solutions.
Awesome. Sarajan, your turn.
Hey everybody, can you hear me? Hi, sorry, I can't turn my video on right now, but I'm listening tonight. Nice to see everybody's faces. I do some political work here in Vancouver, involved in housing, tenants' rights issues with an organization called Vancouver Tenants Union mostly. I've been involved in civic politics as well. Thanks so much, Amir, and nice to see you, Richard.
In case you haven't noticed already, Richard, she makes a lot of noise. I don't know if Hamid is around, but if he is, Hamid John.
Yes, hi, my name is Hamid, and I'm a real estate investor and developer, and my background is also civil engineering and construction. Happy to be here.
Awesome. Taha.
Hello, everyone, and thank you, Amir, for the event. I'm Taha, PhD student at UBC, and working on political education, and yeah, that's all. Great to be here.
Awesome. Mohammed John.
Hi, I'm Mohammed. I'm a PhD candidate at School of Population and Public Health at UBC, and I work with marginalized populations.
Awesome. Masood, can you hear us? You're muted.
Okay. Yeah, Nice to see you all. My name is Masood. I'm civil engineer and working as a project manager in construction project in Vancouver. Yeah.
Awesome. I don't know if Abbas can hear us, but for now, I just get Seema to introduce herself.
Hello, everyone. Hi, Richard, and welcome. I'm Seema, Director and Editor-in-Chief, Hamiari Media, Farsi language bi-weekly, published in Vancouver. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, and my name is Amir. I used to be a flight data analyst until COVID hit my job. And I'm also a community activist, and we're grateful to have everyone here. Just before we pass it on to Richard, I invite people to keep their cameras on so that Richard, as we want to simulate a real life meeting as for Richard to see us all. And with that, Richard, the floor is all yours.
Amir, I'm very used to staring at a camera and talking into the void. So it is nice to see faces, much different than staring at a blank camera. I think when I started doing this a while ago now as a journalist, it was one of those sort of jarring experiences of, you're trying to connect individually with everyone, but the realization is when you speak into the camera, a lot of people are watching. And so that's been sort of a surreal experience. So first, Amir, thank you for inviting me. Nice to meet all of you. I love doing this, and because I think it's an important way to connect with people in the province and communities to sort of talk about, and the real reason I want to be here is to take your questions. I want to know what you're interested in talking about. But I do want to give you a sense of who I am and what I do, so you know what to chat about. So I'll sort of talk twofold. I'll talk about the work that I do and the things that I have covered, and the provincial election, and leading into what we're experiencing now with COVID, which I'm covering and following every single day. And then I'll talk a little bit about the work I do, and more importantly, I think the state of journalism and where we're at in terms of how things have changed, and how it is more important now than ever before, I believe, in good, sound journalism and communicating with the public. So my name is Richard Zosman. I'm a reporter at Global BC. I've been at Global BC for 3 years now. I was at the CBC before that. And I sort of worked my way through other media organizations. I've been a working journalist since I graduated from journalism school at Syracuse University in 2008. And I have spent most of my working career here in British Columbia. I was in Alberta for 18 months at City TV in Edmonton. I was born and raised in Ottawa. I loved politics and journalism from a young age. I went to Queen's University, where there was the broadcast voice of the Queen's football and basketball and hockey teams, and worked at the student newspaper. And I worked on Parliament Hill for a year following journalism school, and then cleansed myself of all of that by going to journalism school. And I've been working as a reporter and predominantly covering politics now since 2013, 2014. So as you all know, we've gotten ourselves through what was in many cases, an unprecedented election. It was different for many, many reasons. Clearly, we don't have now, with fixed election dates, very many snap elections. And although it was becoming increasingly clear through the back end of the summer that this was something that was being discussed in Premier John Horgan's office, it came as a bit of a surprise at the end of September that we were thrust into an election campaign. And then clearly what made it very different was COVID-19. And so typically during an election campaign, and 2017 was a prime example, I moved over from my home here in Victoria to Vancouver, where the campaigns are situated and based out of. And I traveled a little bit with the leaders at the time, Christy Clark and John Horgan, and sort of quarterbacked coverage from Vancouver leading to Election Day, whereas this time it was very, very different. I did it all from here in my basement in Victoria. I was able to go to one, I think, John Horgan event that he held about 10 blocks from my house in Victoria at the local hospital. And so I thought it would have been a bit foolish if I didn't attend that in person, considering it took me 10 minutes to walk there. But it was obviously much different to cover. Normally we would be spending entire days with leaders. How the major broadcasters in this province and the country do it is they alternate reporters on a weekly basis with a leader. So again, you're not getting too sunk into one campaign. You are rotating, and it also provides a little bit of more diversity of who you're covering and what you're covering. And so typically in BC, with two major parties and a third party that has some, there's strength in certain ridings, you would alternate 1 week on with the Liberals, 1 week on with the NDP, try to squeeze in some days with the Greens, and then repeat that sort of cycle. And so we didn't have that this time around. So I was here in my basement. I would often call in to the press conferences held by both John Horgan and Andrew Wilkinson, and when I could, Sonia Furstenau. So it was a very, very different campaign. And clearly the question that people were trying to answer when they went to vote was, do I want change in a time of uncertainty in my life, or do I want things to remain the same? And ultimately the voters, and if you have questions about the campaign and about the election, we can get into all of that. But I feel that at this point we've seen the result. The result was clear, right? That people decided they did not want to have change in the midst of a pandemic, and John Horgan swept to power with a substantial majority government. And it's obviously far more complex than just change or no change, right? There is a deep trust with John Horgan. If you look at any of the polls, people were satisfied, and I believe continue to be, and I'll get to that in a minute why I use the past tense there, because a lot has changed since the election finished. That there's a great confidence in the way that the province was handling the pandemic, and that there was also great confidence in the way that John Horgan was dealing with those agenda items, right? 2017 was a clear election around the affordability issues in Metro Vancouver, about childcare, about housing, around transit. And those issues were ones that John Horgan has put a lot of time and energy into since then. And so people want to see him continue that. And then since we got out of the election campaign, we've seen this second wave. And yes, we were seeing cases of COVID increase during the election campaign. And no, I do not believe that the two have anything to do with each other. I know that there's some noise the BC Liberals want to make that for some reason that, the election campaign led to this surge in COVID-19 cases. There's nothing that indicates that that's true except for political gamesmanship. But we have seen this significant surge. And now John Horgan has been given this, clear slate, this new agenda, and he is now trying to manage through, this dueling crises that are happening. That of a health crisis that are breaking records. I have a story that's going to air on the NewsHour in about 10 minutes, looking at massive surges in hospitalizations, massive surges in people in intensive care, massive increases in deaths in terms of percentage wise. I think deaths are up 70% this last month from COVID. All of these things are deeply concerning. And that is a political, and then, so that health crisis continues, and Dr. Bonnie Henry is managing that with Adrian Dix and the premier being consulted on all of that. And then the other crisis that's coming is the economic one that will follow. And that is going to have impact on all of us, right? The changes in the way that we do things, and what reflection does that have on our economy, and how does that allow us to build from that? And does it create, and I think there's a great concern for many, including myself, that it will create deeper divisions and divides in our society and our community. The rich will get richer, the poor will get poorer. That divide will continue to widen, and that is one of those issues that could have us on the brink of disaster. We've seen that in many places around the world, this growing gap, and that a pandemic like this everywhere could continue to create that divide. So all of these things are things that are obviously being watched very, very closely as the province continues to manage, while dealing with all of the other issues that are sort of front and center of people's minds. As we and last week we saw Premier Horgan introduce a new cabinet, and it was a cabinet that had some change in education, which for many is a crucial issue if you have kids in the school system, especially if you're living in Metro Vancouver, where we're seeing so many cases of the virus. It is omnipresent in your lives, the situation in schools. We had a change in education. Jennifer Whiteside is the new minister. Rob Fleming has been moved to transportation. We've had some new faces added to cabinet. Bowen Ma will be in charge of infrastructure. Many see her, the North Vancouver MLA, North Vancouver Lonsdale, is a real star in the party, and we will see what sort of responsibility she's given as a minister of state and at a seat at the cabinet table. Ravi Kahlon is now the minister responsible for economic recovery, a new job combined with the minister of jobs that will be crucial, like essential to working with community and working with stakeholders to start developing plans for getting out of this. So the cabinet gave us a little bit of a sense of where the focus is for this government and what they're planning on doing next. So I think that's a little bit of a summary of what we've done. And if you want to get into like the issues that matter to you, how this government's dealing with it, why decisions were made, I'm more than happy to talk about all of that when we get to it. And really, I want to save as much time as possible for questions. And then I also, just to the work that's being done, I mentioned being a journalist now, I think is more important than ever before. And it's hard not to look south of the border, and the attacks that President Donald Trump has made on the media have had an impact here as well. And, we feel that, and we see this, that there's an attempt by some to create skepticism around the media. And I think skepticism is important. I think you should be skeptical of where you are getting your news, where you are getting your information. But what the president has tried to do is discredit, media organizations that are doing good journalism, especially journalism that was critical of him. And yes, our situation here is very different, but some of those, because of how much people here watch American news and through social media, you are inundated by it. Some of those feelings come here, and so it makes it even more important for all media organizations, but especially some of the major media organizations in the province, to continue to do good work, to continue to show our work, to continue to explain why we are doing certain things and choosing certain stories and working towards reflecting and continuing to reflect our community. Like we're very, very lucky at Global BC. The British Columbians have trusted the news product for as long as it's been on air. We continue to be the #1 watched news program. CKNW, and we're all owned by Chorus Entertainment, is now the #1 radio station in Metro Vancouver for news. Our website recently peaked as the #1 news website, passing the CBC for the first time. So all of those things are really, and we're really proud of them and thankful to everyone, and we appreciate that. But it's also another reminder that we just need to continue to work harder and keep people's trusts. And the job is becoming harder. I am doing on a day-to-day basis. Today I wrote 3 web stories. I didn't file for radio today, but on typical days, I'll be on the radio or I'll file for radio. I do a twice weekly segment with Simi Sarah on CKNW at 6:35 on Tuesday and Thursday mornings. And then I file for television for our 6-hour news hour program. And then I'm on the morning show every morning from this spot here in the basement. And it's overwhelming at times. And I just want to close before I take questions, because I'm hoping you have lots of questions and we can have a real good conversation about this. But I have never felt as a journalist the sort of immense responsibility with how much people want to know about this COVID and the pandemic as now, and the personal toll it takes on an individual as a journalist. I think we're all feeling this, that we're living through the pandemic as well. I have kids in school. I have a loved one who's living with us, who's in the midst, my mother-in-law is in the midst of cancer treatments. And so she's at the hospital. And so we're worried about, hospital capacity issues, just to like knowing, and the volume of people I hear from every day around their concerns, it's you start wearing it. So it's one of those things in a story where sometimes in a story you can distance yourself, right? You are presenting the news to people. You go and you cover it and you tell people the information. But with COVID, it's becoming increasingly harder to separate because so much of it is part of what we're all living. So it's been a challenge, but it's still the best job in the world and an incredible thrill. So I'll leave it there just to give you guys a sense of who I am and the things that I've worked on. But I really want to leave it up to you guys to lead this conversation, and I can get into any of the issues you guys like to talk about.
Thank you, Richard. Before we get there, there are two other items of business. We got two guests joining us after the introductions. I wanted to welcome them and get them to introduce themselves. So Miss Marzia Behari, if you can just introduce yourself, say hi if you want to. I don't know if you can hear us.
Hi, everybody. This is Marzia Behari. I would like to attend the meeting.
Welcome. And we have Mr. Abbas Sedri. If you want to introduce yourself, say hi. You're muted, sir. You're muted still. Oh. You are still muted, but
hi everybody. I'm really happy to see you here. Have a good night.
Awesome. And we want to, as per our tradition, we want to take a group photo. So if you want to be in the photo, turn your cameras on, and we will take a group photo. And remember to smile. 1, 2, and 3. Everyone ready? Done. All right. Thank you so much. And we already had one hand up. So maybe we go to Mohammed for the first question.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Richard. And thank you for everything you're doing. I think the media is playing a very important part in this whole pandemic coverage and everything. As someone who's in public health, I think we kind of face some similar issues when it comes to informing the public. And I was wondering how you deal with the so-called infodemic around COVID. And how much do you think that people in media or in public health need to challenge every piece of misinformation out there? Because at one point, like you said, it gets really overwhelming, and you feel like you have to drop it at one point, because the sources out there, there are fake medias there. They tend to cherry pick the evidence around treatment, prevention, everything. I'm sure you've seen a lot of it. How do you deal with that? And then just to say that, to keep yourself sane and healthy as well, not to lose it,
Yeah, and I appreciate that, Mohammed. I also like that you've asked multiple questions. I've become famous on the Dr. Henry briefings for asking multiple questions in one. I once jammed in 5 questions in one, and I got a really hard time from everybody. But once you have that phone and Bonnie Henry is listening, you can talk for as long as you want and they're not going to cut you off. So I will try my best to hit both of those points. I think, one of the concern, the misinformation part is hard. I think, I rely obviously heavily on the briefings that we get from Dr. Henry and Adrian Dix, and the reporting is based on that. But there clearly is a lot of other information. There's a lot of pieces to this, right? So I'm getting communicated at a lot through email and Twitter from people who are sending me links to different websites that they have found, or links to different studies. And we hear this a lot from Dr. Henry, that we are managing our own pandemic, that, some of the things, and this is based on, let's just first talk about good science, right? So let's talk about a good study that came out of Korea that was based on transmission within schools. And so someone here in British Columbia may take the study and send it to me and go, can you challenge Dr. Henry on this study? Because this is what they've done in Korea and they've seen these cases. Well, it's hard in some cases to apply directly information that's happening in one jurisdiction to another jurisdiction based on different measures, different human behaviors, different sort of government structures. So that's one piece, right? And that's hard. And then there's the other piece of people using, in some cases, misinformation, or as you rightly pointed out, Mohammed, cherry picking certain parts of information and applying it. So we try our best to ensure that the voices you hear on the news are credible and reliable. We had one issue that's been raised recently and as about these churches that are remaining open in the Fraser Valley, mainly out of protest towards the provincial health orders. And there are some voices that are part of that protest movement that are not credible on a lot of issues. They are COVID truthers, they are anti-maskers, but they also have their voice is that of those wanting to open their churches. And we have to respect that. No, we don't have to. We have to acknowledge that in our society, there are people who are going to be anti-mask, that are going to be anti-COVID, that are going to spread this message that this is just the same as the flu. And our responsibility, and it's hard, Mohammed, is not to respond to all of them, but to try to counter it with the facts. And we know, we know that not everyone's watching the news every night. We know that not everyone is watching these briefings. We know all of that. So people are getting a lot of information through other sources, Facebook, their friends, so it's all about just trying to best saturate the society, community with the right information around the right things. And I am a user of Twitter. I am a believer in Twitter. I'm a believer in the way people use Facebook, in groups to provide information. But we also have to remember, one voice is one voice. One voice in this group is one voice on Twitter is one voice. And it may not be representative of the entire community. And often that gets, when you see that like or that comment pop up and it gets liked 20 times and you all of a sudden think this is significant, it is a small part of a much larger picture. So I think that's sort of how we combat it. And in public health, I'm very appreciative of the work that you do and others do. And it's really, I know how hard a challenge it is in public health as well to get that message out. Personally, it is the greatest challenge I think I've ever faced, trying to distance the personal on various different accords. Like I mentioned, the issue of the managing having kids in school, but it's more than that. I feel this deep sense that I want to help people with their questions, and I get a lot of questions. I get emailed 30 to 40, 50 questions a day from people. They hear me on the briefings, they see me on the news, they think that I have this immediate path to Dr. Henry, and I get very personal, very specific questions and very broad questions sometimes, and I try to respond to people's emails. It's sort of embarrassing. We just got a notification at work that they're monitoring our spam or our junk mail, and we have to click off and I hadn't even looked at my junk folder forever. I thought junk folder was for junk. And so they're like, you have to click on it, and it only logs for a week. And there was 78 emails from people that had gone into my junk in the last week. So I don't know how I've missed hundreds of emails from people, and I'm really embarrassed and trying to figure out a way to apologize to people because I don't want them to think that I've been ignoring them. But they've all ended up not all, because I thought I was getting a lot in my other inbox too. So that's an aside. That I feel this great responsibility to get people information, and it's hard to balance with 2 kids at home. My wife is also a journalist. She works for News 1130, and she's been really working on the school numbers. So we spend a lot of time tracking the numbers, digesting the numbers. It's been hard, but I'm trying to find techniques, like all of us in our lives, to separate yourselves a bit from this. It is all encompassing for me. And if I can find a time in the day to separate myself, I'm trying to get better at that. But it's been a work in progress, I guess is the easiest way to say it.
Thank you, Richard. We got two new guests joining us, encouraging. Nazanin John, it's your chance to introduce yourself.
Oh, hi. My name is Nazanin. I live in Vancouver. I'm a clinical counselor, and I was also a MLA candidate with the BC Greens at Vancouver, Kensington. Nice to meet you, Richard. I follow you on Twitter.
Nice to meet you. Good. Thank you.
Yeah, actually, Said, I don't know what happened, but I'm sure he's going to come back. So the next question goes to our other journalist on the floor, Seema.
Thanks, Amir. Thanks again, Richard. Welcome to this co-hosted meeting with Amir. Was so nice to ask us to co-host this one. So I guess the popular topic, recent election, I have a question about that. One of the things that was noted in the recent election compared to the past was that the fact that parties were more focused on intimidating voters about the consequences of the opposite party taking over rather than focusing on their own platforms. If you agree with this, do you believe that such an approach have been resultful? And why and when do you think parties take such an approach?
I think we're seeing more. Again, we borrow a lot of what we do here from the United States, and that has been a tactic in the United States for a long, long time, right? I think there's this famous ad from the 1988 election. Michael Dukakis was running for the Democrats, and the Republicans ran an ad of a revolving door at a prison, and to try to make a point about a decision he had made, I think governor of Massachusetts, around lowering limits for some offenders. And so we've seen this style forever of trying to frame your opponent in a negative light and create doubt in the public's mind. I know that there was some of that this time around early in the campaign. I did stories about it. The NDP tried to frame Andrew Wilkinson early around this perception of his elitism and a doctor and a lawyer, and that he's only looking out for his $1 million friends. Like, that was a very clear tactic from the NDP, one that seemingly works. And the Liberals struggled to paint Horgan in the midst of a pandemic. They've always wanted to frame him as hot-headed, and in this campaign especially, there were issues around honesty and trust. And I think the Greens, and Sonia Furstenau, was far more effective in making that argument about Horgan than Andrew Wilkinson was. But I think this campaign was very unique. Like, it wasn't, those weren't the central issues. That the public was not convinced by these tactics. It was more an issue of, who's going to lead us and how are they going to lead us, and how are they going to manage the pandemic? Like, we looked at polling around issues. There were some major issues that were brought up, right? Getting rid of ICBC's monopoly, cutting the PST for a year, huge investments in childcare, reforming our education system, obviously focused on healthcare and long-term care. And those issues were seemingly secondary to personality. So, to answer the crux of your question, I don't think it was a huge factor here. But we know that those techniques work, and that's why politicians use them. My great desire in life is to inform every British Columbian about the issues, right? And to take those substantive issues. But the reality is, we have limited time, we have limited capacity. I'm always of the thought that elections are won, and sort of obviously how you relate to the people in their everyday life. Like, am I sitting in traffic more? Am I getting a larger ICBC bill? Is my hydro bill going up? Can I afford a house? Like the things that just schools, like, are my classrooms getting crowded? Do I have good teachers for my kids? Like these are the things that people ultimately make decisions on. And yes, negative ads are effective in painting a certain picture and creating doubt, but they're also, I think, secondary ultimately to how people are deciding. That's just based on studying, and I'm very interested in the question you pose and trying to better understand how ads work. But I think this time around was just so unique in the sense that there were just so many other factors that were happening. And we also have, last point on this, we saw the NDP, a copy of their message guide got leaked to some members of the media, and it was, they're using polarizing language, but it's effective. Like us versus them. We look out for you, they look out for their $1 million donors. We care about people, they care about corporations. Like, and yeah, not, you know, on the face of it, it's not true, but as a theme, it sends a message to people. So I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. And I want to ask Dr. Said to introduce himself too, because I thought that he left the meeting. If you can hear us, Said, can you hear us, Dr. Said? Okay, I guess he can't. Sorry. So before, like, if anybody has a question, feel free to just ask it. If not, I'm going to ask one of mine. Richard, I've been following your Twitter, like Nazanin, and the drawings behind you. Do you want to tell us about those?
I do. So these ones are from a recent series that we did for the election. And so my daughter is 9, my son is 5. This is from, we did a series of 87 drawings for 87 ridings, which was really fun. So we worked it with the candidates, and we did some brainstorming ourselves, and we came up with pictures for all of the different ridings. And so what do I have up here? So this one is actually, so this is Burnaby Lougheed. It's kids playing, but the original Burnaby Lougheed drawing was the Global BC Studios. And we did a story about this for the NewsHour, and we featured the drawing of our hosts, Chris Galis and Sophie Louie, and my colleague Keith Baldry. This one is Vancouver Hastings. It is the wooden roller coaster at the PNE. And then the legislature has been omnipresent through all of my hits. Bailey did this one for me, my daughter, in April. And so part of where all this started, is you could see it over there, was this, there's this Twitter page called A Room Rater. And it's one Canadian and one American, and they have been rating everybody's rooms. And so the kids drawing started as a way to score high points and evolved. So I'm now in the 10 out of 10 club. And the room rater just sent around gifts for everyone that's in the 10 out of 10 club. So I have my 10 out of 10 pillow there that got sent to us. So it's a way that I have tried to inject personality into what has been a very, tough time for a lot of people. At the beginning, when I started doing the drawings, I would get a lot of emails from people, and we sold a number of the drawings for donations to local food banks, which was really, really cool. It started with someone in Ucluelet, and about a dozen people offered to buy the drawings. So Bailey would do drawings for them, and they would make donations to their local food bank, and we would send them the drawings. So it was really, I loved it. It was, I've got my stack here. It was one of the best things that we did. So our plan now is to give the drawings to the MLAs who won for each of the ridings. So it's been really, really, so like, here's our Sasquatch from Nelson, our peacock from Victoria, our Ogopogo from Kelowna. So it's been the Woodward's building in Vancouver. So it's been really fun. So if you have any requests to favorite ridings and you want to see the pictures, I could probably find them somewhere in here.
Awesome. My writing is False Creek.
Okay, I have False Creek somewhere in here. False Creek was Science World.
Yes,
I don't know if this came over in this pile, but yeah, it was really, really fun.
It's all good, but we have Dr. Saeed who has a question, and then we go to Sanjay. But can you also introduce yourself, Saeed?
Sure. I'm Saeed Zavre. I'm a physician, internal medicine and ICU. And first of all, thank you, Richard, for such a great presentation. Thank you, Amir, for arranging this informative session. I have a question from Richard regarding this election reform in 2018. And what is your personal opinion that John Horgan did right with that question, or basically most of voters, they didn't know what they vote, and the intention was that we cannot get proportional seats in legislature. What do you think?
I don't have any personal opinion, Saeed, so I'll start with that. but you know, in observing John Horgan for a long time, there's a lot of thoughts that his heart was not in this thing, that he did not want to have proportional representation or electoral reform. And there was a lot of sense that he just wasn't campaigning particularly hard for the issue of change. And I think that was demonstrated, right? Like there could have been an impassioned plea like we saw from the Greens and spending time knocking on doors and campaigning door to door. John Horgan did not do that. But I think it also reflects people are afraid of change, especially when it comes to our electoral system. I think people are really worried about what the outcomes could be. And I think the government did propose the sort of buyer's remorse clause, which was if we voted for proportional representation, we could then vote again after we had one election under the system and decide if we were comfortable with it or not. But I think most people felt that it was complex and confusing, and people don't like feeling, I remember saying this at the time, people don't like feeling stupid, especially when they vote. People never want to feel stupid. And I think a lot of people felt unprepared for understanding the complexities and the opposition, those that are in favor of keeping the electoral system the same way, kept sending out this message. This is confusing. This is complex. John Horgan is trying to confuse you. And in turn, that was a disservice to the public. Because I found it at times complex, but it was my job to try to explain it to people. I remember I put together a 4-minute video that we had on the website and we ran on the NewsHour at one point, just about like the process. These are the systems. This is what we're looking at. And this is how it would work here. And I remember I did it at the legislature, and we had graphics around me in the chamber sort of showing what the layout would look like in different scenarios. And, you know, I don't know if our democracy would be better served with a proportional system. I have no idea. You know, I know there's academics who agree that it's better representation. There are others that believe that with a leader like John Horgan, you know, who's seen as sympathetic and progressive, that we could have great benefits in a majority government in a first past the post system. But then you could also have other leaders who, under the power of a majority, stop listening to the electorate because they have this absolute power. I just don't know what the answer is to what is the better system. But I do know that it's been tested now 3 times in the last decade. And it would be stunning to think that we'll have electoral reform in British Columbia. If we have reform, and again, the Trudeau promised it, didn't do it, wasn't punished at the polls for that issue. It's not a vote switching issue, so politicians don't feel like it's life or death. I also think that I don't know if Andrew Weaver and the Greens had done negotiations again, their smartest move may have been go into the Liberals. If they truly wanted to work with the Liberals, which I know Weaver did, Sonia Furstenau refused. It was a true negotiation. All they should have asked for was proportional representation without a referendum. And bring in that change to electoral reform, and it would have ensured the Greens' political relevancy for the next generation. And that could have been the only thing they asked for, and they would have gotten more than they got out of those negotiations with the NDP. But I'm not even sure they ever, you know, the book that my friend Rob Shaw and I wrote, we look a lot into what happened in those meetings, and there it is, and what happened with the negotiations. And I never truly believed that the Greens wanted to work with the Liberals. But if for some reason they were willing to, that would have been the only, like in hindsight, force PR, change the electoral system without a referendum, take the heat from the electorate for it, and then they would have had their system that would have ensured that Greens would have been representative for a generation. But that didn't happen. And so we're, you know, I don't mind talking about it, but the reality is, in many people's minds, we're beyond PR. PR is done. That conversation in BC is over, and the focus is on clearly, you know, daylight saving time and other important issues.
Well, to get to more questions, just I really like all your comprehensive answers, Richard.
Yeah, I could be short. I'll be shorter. I'm good at taking time cues, Amir.
Awesome. Sanja, the other journalist in the room.
Thank you, Amir. Thank you, Richard. My question is also related to this electoral reform.
Yeah.
Is there any discussion, any discussion going on, like behind the scene about this? Because it's really about the representation. We are losing, like let's say 49% of the vote every election. They don't have any representative in the legislative once the election is done, because first past the post is very old system.
Yeah.
And the people who are losing, they don't have their representative at the legislative, right? So is there any behind the scene discussion about this proportional system? One.
Yeah.
The second one is, of course, for introducing the new system, there should be lots of investment to educate people.
Yeah.
And I think that it's not a good excuse to say that, well, it's very complicated.
Yeah,
we have this proportional system in many very undereducated countries, like in Africa, let's say, right? And at the same time, I think that but in my personal opinion, the proportional system is good for minorities, because minorities and political parties like Greens will have more representative at the legislative with the proportional system. This is the question related to the election. The second question is about the COVID. How do you manage, like every day there is like a briefing of 2 hours, sometimes 3 hours briefing. How do you manage, Richard, to get the core info from all those, you know, the like 3 hour briefing and get back to the audience and give the information back to the audience? Thank you.
Yeah. It may feel like 3 hours, but they're only an hour. So sometimes we get technical briefings before. They feel like 10 hours for me. Okay, so I'll go through it. No, there's no conversations happening behind the scenes around PR. I think the feeling politically is that decision has been made and it's done. The second point you were making is a valid one and was raised many times during the debate around proportional representation. And I think to some of the points I was making earlier, there is sort of a deep concern around change. But you're right, there should have been a greater conversation around how those systems work, how they work in other countries. I tried to convince my bosses to send me to New Zealand to do a story about New Zealand, and I had the money in place to do it, and then things got caught because they are very similar to us. They moved from a first past the post system through a referendum to a proportional system, and in many regards, it's working well. Around, you know, representation, I think there's validity there to you know, more representative voices. You know, if you go you live in a riding that's considered a safe seat. It is frustrating to think that your vote doesn't count because, and here in Victoria, Swan Lake, my riding, the NDP is going to win. And if you vote for anybody else, in many cases, it's a wasted vote. Although the one counterpoint to that is there's some now political subsidies for parties based on vote. That helps political parties manage, create, a strength. But I do think that we are better served when we have more voices around the table. The last point on that is the political culture that exists in British Columbia and in Canada, right? There is a strong institutionalized culture around our major parties, and it trickles down in intensity from those who work in the legislature down to the general public. And there is a deep intensity around the party that you work for. And that's why collaboration, yes, there was a lot of conversations about the NDP and the Greens working together, but ultimately there are many people in there who view them as political enemies. And that is a deep-seated issue that we have in our political staff and our political community that I love. There are so many fantastic political staffers in this province, and they care immensely about constituents, about issues, about their party, but there are others who are doing it that have a deep partisanship, and that's a challenge too. So it's about changing that culture too. That's important. COVID briefing. So it is hard, and I try to tweet. I use Twitter basically as my notepad, and it has been one of the most fantastic tools for me. And a briefing at 3 o'clock for a 5 o'clock deadline. I normally have to get my script to my editor at 4, and I'm on the briefings until 4. And so it's very hard to balance it all. But I use Twitter, I live tweet events so that I can then go, oh yeah, he talked about youth sports at 3:46. And then I can go into my computer system and I can find that quote and I can use it for the story. But it's hard. It's really, I wish they did the briefings at 1 o'clock. I wish they did them at 11 a.m. It would make our jobs a lot easier. But it's, in some briefings, as you mentioned, go on. When we do the modeling, it can be intense, but it's just about managing, keeping good notes, and then I tweet so that I can refer back in the end.
Thank you, Sina. You're muted. You're still muted. There we go.
Sorry about that. Thanks, Amir, and thanks, Richard, for the amazing story. So I have 2 questions, and I'm not sure whether the second one is very related or not, but feel free to avoid that. So the first one is about divisive politics, and that's what we see south of the border a lot, and the outcome of that, of what happens in the civilization and the damage that it can have to the society. How can we as citizens request that from our politicians to stay away from that, so that as a society we move towards a much healthier political environment? So that's the first question. The second question is about the insurance. And I haven't done much research into it, but as an ordinary citizen, what I've observed is that the home insurance, which I'm not sure, but I think it's not under a monopoly.
Regulated, right?
It's gone up significantly this year. So why is there an argument that if ICBC goes away, then we won't see any rises? Why wouldn't the same concept apply to ICBC or vice versa?
Amir told me to be short, Sina. So I will try. I have spent a lot of time pre-COVID on ICBC and insurance stories. So I will get to that in a minute. And I will be as succinct as I can be. And you can send me an email after. We can talk. I've done a lot of work on that. I will give you the broad strokes on that. But let me go to the decisiveness part. And what worries me the most is the reason why politicians use divisive language is because it works and it allows them to win. And in the United States, especially, the polarization of language, speaking to your base only, allows you to raise more money and galvanize your base and create momentum. And you can win elections by only speaking to, 40%, 50% of the electorate. You don't need to speak to the entire electorate. And you hope to have a commitment from politicians that they won't do that, but you ultimately, you don't govern unless you win. And so what's the point of running if you're not going to win and be allowed to govern? And there's the altruistic idea of we run to put out ideas, to have conversations, to have dialogue, to improve our communities, to show that we care about our communities. But then many people believe, well, if I want to talk about all these issues, I want to change these issues, I have to win in order to do it. So people do what they can to win. And that is it's like that in everything where there's a winner and loser, is people find strategies to do it. And I appreciate politicians who in their core want to have dialogue around the things that matter. And so I hope we have less divisiveness, but it is a circular challenge, obviously. And the United States only feeds into that cycle. On insurance. So you are correct in this assertion that the idea that choice means cheaper. And that is what politicians have tried to argue on the right, the BC Liberals, saying, if we give you more choice, it means there's going to be far cheaper options because, if you're all competing against each other, you need to provide the best price. But the issue with car insurance and many other things is that there's product and there is price. And the product can vary wildly. And one of the issues, and what we've seen in Alberta where they have a private system, is there are many companies that won't even insure some drivers. And then there are other companies that will take on that risk at massive costs to the driver. And so that doesn't get us in a better place. I think we're on, ICBC is far from perfect. One of the issues we have here is we misconstrue what we're mad about. Are we mad about car insurance or are we mad about ICBC? And it gets combined because ICBC has been poorly managed for a long time. Although under Nicholas Jimenez, who's now the CEO, they have done a much more effective job at governing and communicating. And I think they're working with this provincial government to restore some of that trust in the insurer. So that's the short answer. And yes, we've seen skyrocketing strata rates, and the argument from the private insurers is, the reason why stratas are so expensive here is because private insurance companies don't want to operate here because they can't sell car insurance. And if they could just sell car insurance, and they would come here in droves, and then they would offer you cheaper strata insurance. So there's games being played, obviously, but I think you're right to be skeptical about that idea that more means cheaper. But I do think that it is a value, and I was optimistic that this election would be about ICBC, and I'm talking in January, I predicted that our next provincial election would be about having a conversation about ICBC. It impacts millions of people. It's an actual genuine policy debate we can have, and obviously COVID is what the conversation was about. And maybe one day we'll get back to the ICBC conversation. But for now, as we move to no fault in May, which is a massive shift, it's going to be interesting to see what that does for rates. But I hope that, if it didn't, you can email me and we could talk out car insurance, but that's sort of the broad strokes of it.
Thank you. So if both myself and Seema have other questions, but if anybody else want to jump in, Mehdi, go ahead.
Thank you, Richard. My question is mostly about the whole fake media thing that is going on south of the border, and the platforms that we have during the past 2 decades. So before the 2000s, if you had a media, for me, you have to go out and listen to things or read about it, and the chances that you could hear other voices other than your own political reference was really high. But now with the whole Facebooks and Twitter and all that kind of thing, that you just like whatever you like, you are getting just that thing. And I'm seeing, for me, myself, I like to see on the both ends. And even for me, that I want to see other political views is getting harder and harder, because that kind of a algorithm that Facebook and Twitter has, it just blocks you. it doesn't even come to me, that the media that I want to see. So I want to know your opinion about it. And like, I'm really worried about the platforms that we are having. Unless we break through these kind of platforms, the division in the political views, I don't think that it will get any better. So yeah,
I'm really worried about it too. And I think part of it is about innovation from major media organizations. You know, Global has created a partnership with Amazon to offer our news product through Amazon Prime. So by going to people and going where they are at, how they are consuming their media, I think helps. I think, you know, if you're on your smart TV or on your Amazon Fire and you're flipping through and Netflix and Prime, and you can now see there's news offerings there. So that I think helps us get to where people are. You know, the scary thing is, and this was pre-COVID and it's even more jarring now, that more people in British Columbia will watch Netflix tonight than all of the TV stations combined. And that continues to expand. And so people are obviously getting their information elsewhere. The algorithms are challenged too. I wish that we would have greater conversations from governments around how they're going to work with providers like Facebook and Twitter and that are not regulated in Canada, to have a larger conversation around how to ensure that that information is getting to people. And I know there are people within those organizations who are committed to doing that, right? You've seen the switch on Twitter that when you want to retweet a news article, they offer you the option of reading the article before you actually send it out to people so that you know what it's about, because often people will share things blindly, and that's what leads to some of these concerns around spread of fake news. Facebook has made a commitment as well around authenticity of news, but Facebook has also made it more challenging in some ways for traditional news organizations to thrive. They take all the profits, and there's not a huge lot of benefit for news organizations to provide our content, which we spend time and money creating for free for people on Facebook. So that's a challenge too. But I worry immensely about it. I think part of the challenge is, you know, continuing to try to be where people are consuming, to their phones, to their iPads, to their smartphones, to all of that. But you know, it's a problem that is not easily solvable, and it stems from a lot of deep issues here in our country in the United States around polarization of you know, class and wealth, and you know, you have a huge portion of the and it's in Canada as well, this great fear of the future, the fear of modernization, in many cases the fear of diversity in our communities, like, and all of that fear, the anxiety creates people who want to consume things of people only speaking their language. And we're lucky in Canada, we haven't had as much permeation of this really polarized media, but in the United, and people have tried here and it hasn't worked, which is really a good sign, because it clearly is working in the United States. But I'm with you. I worry about it immensely, and I try to have these conversations with groups like yours and others to help alleviate some of that, to try to show you that I'm a human being who cares immensely about facts and information and providing that. And so, you know, in a small part, this is me trying to do my part in combating those issues. But also there's a much larger conversation that we're just all as an industry trying to figure out.
Awesome. The next question is from Parveen. If you can hear us. Yes.
Oh, yes. Okay. Oh, let me just, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, perfect. Sorry. Thank you so much, Richard, for all this information. But my question is, if as journalists, you guys are collecting any data on how this coronavirus is affecting women differently from men in Canada, generally speaking. And if you can share this data with us, and or you can refer me to somewhere to go and search for those data, because I would love to collect them.
Okay, so we don't, there was a time where media could do some of that collection work. We just, there's not the resources now, but the work is being done by government, and it's I think it's not simplistic at this point. So we have some anecdotal findings through the government around the impact of the virus on the economy, and that it is disproportionately impacting women. And I can send it to Amir to share around. I'll try to go back and find the study, the work that they are doing. There's some, you can find some of it on the Statistics Canada job site. They update the first Friday of every month. They update the jobs numbers, and they do it demographically. So if you know what to look for, you can find the women compared to men in terms of the workforce. So that impact we're seeing. We also have heard anecdotally from the government around the impacts around, women are often, because of the issues of the school system, it falls upon them to leave their job or to work from home in order to accommodate the children. So we're starting to see some of this anecdotally as well. And there's a great concern from the province, and they've promised that through their pandemic recovery, they will be targeting those that are most impacted. So that's women and it's younger people. And that's where the money and support will be going to help recover through the pandemic. So from what I can remember, there has not been any comprehensive work done here yet, but there is some initial work and some anecdotal stuff. And I will look for it tomorrow, and I'll send it to Amir that he can share what I can find on that.
Thank you so much. I'll definitely circulate that. Mohsen?
Thanks a lot, Richard, for taking the time to chat with us and the great work that you're doing. Without a doubt, free media is one of the pillars of a free society. This question that I have actually was partly covered by the question that Mehdi asked, but I'm asking it as well. But as you mentioned and you pointed out at the beginning of your conversation, there is a degree of distrust, mostly since the past 4 years, towards the media. My question is, since you are basically a journalist, my question is, what is being done from the side of the media to increase the trust of the people in it?
Yeah, and I think part of it is there's a movement towards showing our work a little bit more. Especially in broadcast television, it was all about this polished product you would see every night at 6 o'clock. The fancy music would come in and the anchor would sit there and in their chair and present the news. And it was this polished piece of work that there was very little clarity in terms of how decisions were made to get to that product, right? How were stories chosen? How were interviews done? How did they choose who to interview? How were the stories prioritized in a newscast? And I think a lot of news organizations are trying to spend more time explaining that in other mediums, right? Being more comfortable explaining why certain people are interviewed, why certain stories are chosen. Again, it comes down to, why I'm, here tonight, and it's part to have those conversations to provide openness about how things are done in our industry, because it is, as you mentioned, so incredibly important to our democracy. And so I think we're seeing, and you see this through podcasting, and you see this through the radio and online, better explanations around decisions. And yes, like anyone, journalists and journalist executives are not perfect. Mistakes are made, but we're trying to better reflect the diversity of our communities, the diversity of voices, from men, from women, from cultures, backgrounds, and trying to better represent, or best represent that we can our communities that we serve, because it is hugely, hugely important that we be a reflection. And, I think we have an incredibly diverse newsroom at Global. Ethnic diversity, gender diversity, we do age diversity in some regards. Like, I come from a place where I am becoming more and more aware all the time of my own privilege and my own background. but that I come from a place of I have 2 young kids in a school system. I appreciate some of the burdens associated with affordability and getting into the housing market. And I try to think about those things and the voices of others that are in our newsroom when we present our coverage so that it reflects our community.
Thank you. Before we get to Nazanin, I just want to ask Richard one question, and you don't have to answer it now, but what we do in these meetings are kept secret. What should be our takeaway from this meeting, from this gathering? So you don't have to answer it right now if you want, unless you have one. You can
let Nazanin go and have her question answered, and then I can do it at the end. I will answer whenever everybody else has had their chance.
Cool. Nazanin.
Okay, I'll try not to ask one of those like I have the phone right now. Let me ask every I have in my mind. Thank you, Richard. You're actually much friendlier than your Twitter profile picture, so I'm glad that I came.
Good. I have a new picture up. My new picture is very friendly, I thought.
So, you know, as a kind of a bit of a recent immigrant, when I came, Christy Clark was in power, and I was part of the unions, and you know, she was really not good news for the labor and for like long-term care and you know, those places.
Schools, yep.
Well, for anyone basically who was not middle income and above. Yeah, so and it kind of like it goes back to before my time in Canada, but I'm assuming that the Liberals didn't probably start this way. And from my very limited political knowledge, is incumbent governments kind of stay in BC. They kind of just like stay until they don't anymore. Do you think, so these are the 2 questions that I have. Do you think NDP is going to stay for a long time? Because I remember when Horgan was elected, there were talks that we have 3 years, like in union conventions, that we have 3 years because there's no way that we're going to have another NDP government. So we have to get everything done. And NDP delivered quite good, I think, in a lot of campaign promises that they made, minus the environment and some other stuff and housing. Do you think the NDP is going to stay for long? And do you think they're gonna deliver on their main thing? We have the ministers who were announced, and not a whole lot of people are holding their breath for the housing minister and the finance minister. What do you think is the trajectory for the next 4 years and also for the years to come?
Yeah, and I think that the biggest challenge with answering all this is what is the impact of COVID? And, you know, how long will COVID last? And I think I was talking to somebody about this earlier today. I'll sort of try to combine the 2 answers because, you know, often the knock on the NDP is that they are going to spend us into oblivion and we are going to run rampant debt and you won't be able to afford the NDP. Well, the reality is that there's going to be massive debt no matter who is in power. And we don't know how long that will last or what is prudent, but that is going to be to the benefit of the NDP, right? Their opponents will not, the public will be sympathetic of deficits because of what has happened with COVID. Mm-hmm. So it's impossible to predict, you know, what is going to unfold. Will John Horgan run for a 3rd term? The sense that I get right now is that he won't, but that could very easily change. You know, there's been a lot of evolutions there. And so who becomes the next leader? How do they respond to British Columbians? Where are we at with COVID? And all of that will be what the next election is based on 4 years down the road and could lead to, you know, the NDP, you know, continuing to stay in power. We've had, you know, weird political cycles in this province, right? As you mentioned, long-term dynasties of the Social Credit Party, leading to fractious NDP governments in the 90s, to 16 years of Liberal rule, to now John Horgan. So stability has worked in British Columbia, but the political culture is much different now. I think the NDP and the BC Liberals, they win the election based on who can get more votes in the center, and that's where they all try to govern, and the fringes are what sort of lead to controversy. And so I think we're, those ideological positions on the parties are slowly dissolving, especially with younger people. I find it interesting what you say about our housing and finance minister. I think Selena Robinson struggled to communicate at times, and as municipal affairs and housing minister, I think there are her critics, and I think her struggles were around communication. But I don't know anyone who is a kinder and better communicator with frontline stakeholders. She is a very capable woman and politician. And I look forward to seeing what she can do in that position, because she's trying to fill the shoes of Carol James, which is impossible. So she's going to have to find her own way to communicate as a finance minister. And I think they're going to take a lot of the burden of communication around economic recovery. Carol was always the person we would go to around, overall pictures of our economy, right? And that will be less Selena Robinson, and Ravi Kalon and others will take on that role more heavily of communicating around the economy. David Eby's in charge of housing. And I was thinking about this today. Like, there's mixed views on David Eby as well. He is incredibly polarizing. But he has now a proven track record around helping find solutions at ICBC. The issue with housing, as you know, is it's complex in terms of what is a solution. Like, what is a reasonable solution when there are people on all ends? Is it everybody having a detached home? Is it everybody having a roof over their head no matter where it is? Is it people living in the communities they work? Is it people living in the communities with, their families? Like, how do you define housing? Do we want to see a 5% drop, a 20% drop? How does that impact those who have substantial money in the market already? So all of those, government's about simplifying complex problems. And it will be curious to see what David Eby does. But now that ICBC is behind him and he's managing the money laundering file, I think his next act will be housing. And we'll see how he does. And I think it is obviously far too early to judge, but I do think they are starting to make progress. You look at this is a desirable market to live in. Vancouver Island, Vancouver, and they have made inroads on cutting down. We're seeing increases in detached housing that are at inflation or lower, after seeing 60% increases under the previous government. So there is some, yes, we're not there yet, but there's some progress being made on those files.
Cool. Thanks.
Awesome. Now I want to return it to Seema for her questions. And Richard, do you mind if we go a few minutes over time?
Not at all. Yeah, I'm happy to be here as long as you guys want me.
Wow, that's impressive. Awesome, Seema.
Yes, a little bit of change here. You were one of the Jack Webster Awards winner for your coverage of the 2018 wildfires in BC. Please tell us about your experience of that horrible disaster, both as a journalist and as an ordinary witness.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I refer to that time a lot because it was hugely impactful on my career as a journalist as well as personally. Going into scenes of devastation are immensely challenging. And I'll tell you the two stories I tell the most from my coverage of being there. And they both tie directly to why we do our job in terms of connecting with people. And the first was on the second day we were there. It was the day before the province declared a provincial state of emergency. We returned from Fraser Lake, we were based in Prince George, which is where the command center was for the fire. And each day my camera guy and I would wake up in the morning, communicate with our newsroom about what they would like covered, and we would travel to different areas in the region where the fires were growing. So we went to a place called Fraser Lake, and we set up for a live hit on the lake. And behind me was the lake, and across the lake were a series of homes. And that whole area had been evacuated, and the fire was closing in on those homes. It was about between 3 and 5 kilometers from the homes, the fire, and moving. And so we were there talking about the fire, and all of a sudden in the middle of my live hit, a man walked up and I could see him coming, and it was just my camera guy and I, and we were quite far away, and you're always a little bit wary that someone could jump in front of the camera, or, you know, you don't, there's, when you're live, there's a lot of variables. And he waited and he says, "You're the guy from the news." When I finished, he says, "You're that guy, that station with that Chris Galis guy." And I said, yeah, nice to meet you. He said, "My name's Gord Knutson. And I want to say, you guys took you so long to get here. You don't even care about us. And the minister, he didn't come here, and he's making me drive every day to Prince George to get my money so that I can pay for groceries because I'm out of my house. And he doesn't care about us, and no one cares about how we're doing." And he pointed his house across the water. He goes, "My house is going to burn down." And this guy starts tearing up. And he's like, "No one cares about us." And I'm like, that, you know, that's why we're here. I care about you. You know, we want to tell the stories that your communities matter, that the British Columbians should see the devastation and the impact that's happening. And so that had a deep and profound impact on me. And then the next day, we were covering again, and now the state of emergency has been called. And we return to our hotel. We're out all day. We do live hits at 5 and at 6. And we drive back an hour and a half. We were up in an area called Fort St. James. And I get back to the hotel. I walk in, and there's about 200 people in the lobby of the hotel, 150 or so from a First Nation who had just been evacuated, and 50 or so from the RCMP who had just been dispatched. And I remember walking in, and they had those flavored waters. And so I pouring my water, and I could suddenly sort of realize that everyone in the lobby was looking at me. And I sort of put my head up, and someone yells, "Hey, Richard, what's happening in my community? We just saw you on the news. I want to know if my house is going to burn down." And it was like this sudden realization that not just are we communicating to the province about Gord Knutson and the anxiety he's feeling, where he can see if his house is going to burn down from where he was parked in his RV, but that there's so many that can't, and they rely on us to inform them about whether they are in imminent danger in their property and whether there's going to be anything when they return home. So like those two things were very profound to me about why we do our job, right? It's to inform the province about the issues that happen to our communities and our individuals, but it's also about informing the people in our community. And COVID is a perfect example of that, about, you know, the orders that are in place and the measures that are in place and the things that we must follow. So it was a very deep and profound experience being there. I was there for the entire week. The way that Global does fire coverage as a reporter gets designated in like March a week. And if there's a fire during that week, you get sent, or a flood. And if there isn't, you don't go that year. So that fire really picked up on the Friday. And the bosses decided to send me on the Sunday, and my week was starting on the Monday. So then I stayed through the entire week.
Awesome.
So much. Thank you.
I want to ask a question, a lot, but I want to ask one question, and then I have a question actually from Sanjar. And I want, I think the answer would probably be, you know, it's an insight from a different kind of journalism. So my question, Richard, like a while back, I was watching one of the promos for CBC's National when Peter Mansbridge was still around. And he was talking about, you know, the work that he was doing. And part of it, he was saying, if we can affect one policy, if we can change one decision, that is not a victory, that is news. So just wondering, when can you think of a time that your work or work of others and public opinion in general could, you know, affect a policy? Because a lot of times, at least in our community, we think that the decisions are made behind closed doors and we're just watching the show.
I already made my daylight saving joke, but that, you know, we did a lot of reporting on that, and they now have legislation. And BC, although Horgan has been indecisive on it, will eventually get rid of seasonal time changes, and that is only due to public feedback. Like, you know, this was not a burning issue for policymakers, nor it is a particularly large vote getting one, but it was a problem that people saw and they want to get it changed. So I often joke, but it's relatively minor in terms of, you know, the impact. You know, it has your impact on your life twice a year. But when you think of larger issues, you know, obviously the reporting that Global did on money laundering in casinos is starting to have an impact on policy. Like, we've seen obviously an incredible tightening at casinos around how money moves in and out, and they have in many regards cut down on a lot of the crime that we saw within the casinos, and a lot of that had to do with work that Sam Cooper and John Waugh and other colleagues did, and I was lucky enough to contribute on some of the work that we did on those stories, and that is slowly sort of having residual effects on that. Trying to think, you know, often things, and it's a complex combination, where people, you know, public opinion shifts and then policy shifts, or do the policy shifts out of fear that public opinion is going to shift? So, you know, we've seen a lot of changes, but it's hard to know the chicken and the egg. You know, what came first? Could they anticipate that pressure was coming and made a change, or did they make that change because they felt the pressure? So I can't think of anything else that pops up to mind. There's probably some really obvious ones that pre-COVID that were obvious. ICBC is obviously, you know, that was cost pressures, and they made those seismic changes at ICBC. But yeah, I think, and then there's like always like little reporting that leads to sort of some smaller changes around, you know, you point out a problem that exists, you are persistent in that, and then it changes. I'm often irritated when I point out multiple problems and then nothing changes, which happens regularly as well. But I think our job is not to change policy, to force government to change policy. Our job is to provide voice to those who are concerned with policies, as well as ourselves analyze and point out problems, and then it will be up to government to make those decisions to change or not to change. And as you saw with Christy Clark, she was resistant to change and she lost an election because of it. Whereas John Horgan has been, in many regards, more open to listening a bit and evolving, and his foundation is firmer than hers was.
Awesome. Now, here's the part that actually, I mean, I half lied, but I'll tell you why. So you see, Richard, the countries that we came from, in this example, Iran and Afghanistan, you know, journalism is a very dangerous thing to do.
Yeah.
A lot of people in Iran, of course, they had to go to jail for honest reporting of what's going on. And unfortunately, quite a few journalists lost their life in suicide bombing in Afghanistan, at least in the past number of weeks. And I know Sanjar, I knew his newspaper that he's running before I got to know him in person. And I was following the news from Afghanistan, even though we speak the same language and it's basically the same culture. That insight of, you know, what it costs, like some trivial things, you know, the cost of reporting on them and having like, you know, sacrificing for the sacrifices you make for transparency and democracy. So, you know, I'm glad that you guys are in the same venue, on the same venue tonight. So my question is that, what question do you have for someone like Sanjar, who saw that side of the reporting and now he's here in Langley?
Yeah, like I think, Sanjar, I'm most curious about why you do it. Like, why risk your life and risk imprisonment to bring people information.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Amir. Well, I wasn't, when I started as a journalist, I wasn't expected to be in that dangerous position for just informing public. But yeah, I think it's very typical for politicians, for mafia, for businesses. They don't like media. They don't like media.
They don't like criticism.
Like them when they are doing some favor for them. But no one don't like, no. It's whether they are Democrats, whether they are in America, in the US, or in Canada, or in Europe, they don't like media because we are exposing their weaknesses, their corruption, their shortcomings. So it's more dangerous in Afghanistan because as Amir mentioned, we have lost 25 journalists in just the past 19 years. They've been killed, or whether targeted killing, whether in the suicide bombing, but fortunately we don't have any journalists in the prison. The law and the regulations are much open and democratic. There is no censorship in Afghanistan, and we have very diverse media scene. But in my case, in Afghanistan's case, is media is playing a crucial role in shaping the society, in transforming the society toward a more stable and democratic society. And I think, as I mentioned, there are lots of enemies for that transformation, because lots of people, lots of groups, and variety of stakeholders are benefiting from lack of information and censorship and lack of free media. So we're still struggling. We're trying to do our best, but sometimes due to the security risks, to be honest, we are self-censoring ourselves as well. I was talking to my colleagues the other day, and they said, look, killing a person in Afghanistan is now very, very cheap. It's like around $80 to put a sticky bomb under a car and blow up. So they said that be calm, and we are doing our job. Just do not expose us to those threats and dangers. So thank you.
Yeah, just to add something, like one example of how journalism from Hashtag, which is translated to 8 a.m. And it's funny because in Iran, we have a 7 a.m. newspaper, and Iran's time zone is 1 hour behind Afghanistan. It's kind of interesting. But yeah, I remember a woman was killed in front of a mosque basically because she was accused of insulting Quran by some fanatic cleric, and she was beaten to death and she was killed. And I was following that news, and and that was, of course, the tragic part. But the part that was very moving for me was when Hashtag was reporting on her funeral that she was surrounded by women, like when we were burying him, like women activists, and they did not allow men to get close, and they were guarding their sister. And that was probably one of the most powerful things I've seen in journalism. I'm not a journalist, but that really moved me. Richard, you have a follow-up?
Yeah, like, because journalism has the power to move, the power to connect with people, these very human, deep human moments, and it is further emphasized when life and death and freedom are and I'm so fortunate for journalists around the world who risk their lives to do the work that they do. I'm acutely aware that I am in a fortunate position where I don't need to fight for those freedoms, that I have, freedoms to do my job as a journalist, and I'm afforded to do so. And, we cover protests and the part of the reason is we are lucky to live in a country where you can have a voice to protest, to voice your opposition, and then have that debate and conversation to lead to change in many cases. So yeah, thank you for sharing that story, Amir. Like it is an amazing, it's amazing to think the risks and that people take to help inform the public is in many places is quite incredible.
Thank you. Now, if others have questions, go for it. And we have we're at 7:12, but maybe Seema, do you want to ask other questions?
Sure. Yeah, back to politics in BC. I would like to know, in general, how do you see the political climate in BC compared to the other provinces? Like what differences and similarities do you see in comparison with provinces like Alberta and Ontario? And why do you think some parties could influence better in specific ridings and even provinces? For example, the federal Conservative Party in Alberta, or some ridings where people historically vote for specific parties.
Yeah, and it's super complex, and political scientists spend entire semesters conversing on this exact issue. And the political climate here is there is a polarization in some senses, that a set group of people always vote Liberal, always vote NDP. There's now an emergence of Green supporters, and that is unique in some regards, that we have a strong left, a strong right, and we sort of debate in the center. So BC's political culture is really interesting in that regard. I think it's generally classified as being typically a little bit more, if everybody's bases vote as they will, the Free Enterprise Coalition, which are the BC Liberals, will win elections. But that again has changed through the work that the NDP has done currently. So I think that's sort of a general overview of the political climate here in British Columbia. How it compares, we compare quite similarly to Ontario, although Ontario has three major provincial parties, three parties provincially that have formed government in the last 30 years, although the NDP haven't done so since 1990. So that's one of the differences. Ontario, again, is a slightly more populous than we are here, more diversity in terms of urban centers and rural communities. But that's an impact here as well. So you mentioned Alberta. Alberta is, there's a different type of mentality that people are raised on and live on there around rights and freedoms, and it's sort of part of the fabric that people there are raised in many essences to be more conservative. And so you see strong conservative voices provincially, as well as strong federal voices. And then you have people who typically could be a Liberal somewhere else who run conservative in Alberta because that's how they get elected. So you see that sort of trend of how people view the role of government and view the society. So so it's obviously far more complex than that simple version, but I think that is a good summation of how the sort of political spectrum works. It's more of an academic question than it is a political one, but I feel here that we've had there's a greater debate here around more centrist related issues, whereas in Alberta, if the right is united, the right party wins. And Ontario, it moves more generally between the Liberals and Conservatives. It's sort of like whichever party the province hates less will win the election there. You know, you wear out your visit a little bit like what happened with the BC Liberals here in Ontario. Then you're booted out for a long period of time, and then you're replaced. So you know, it's hard to really compare, but I think we're sort of, most places are like that. You wear out your visit, you're replaced, and then the cycle continues.
Thank you, Richard.
Awesome. Seema, do you have other questions you want to ask?
No, I'm okay, I guess. I don't want to bore.
It's fine.
Enough questions. Thank you.
I have a question. I mean, we kind of talked on the phone about this, about your book. I mean, why would people come and share the stuff that they shared with you? Because some of them are, you know, when I first heard about those stuff, I was like, what are they? These guys are crazy telling, you know, like these are very, like, for instance, the decision on removing the tolls, that, like the way it happened, I was like, holy.
Why are you admitting to doing that?
Why would you do that?
You know, a lot of it is people and want to have their pieces in their legacy, right? They want to be remembered a certain way, and so they revise history in order to do that. And then people want, you know, to be known for certain things, and we provided, in many cases, we did it on background, so all the information we could report, but we wouldn't attribute it to people, so people were more open, and we would back check and fact check what people would say about other people and to create the best picture. And we're hoping, you know, we're in the early conversations about doing a second book that would cover the period up through this last election. And I think part of it is, you know, this sort of journalism is not done. You know, the UK has an incredible culture of book writing and journalists. Many of them will write books following elections and chronicle politicians, whereas we have very little culture of doing that in British Columbia. There's a little bit more doing it federally. So we sort of fill that void, and people found it, I think, a novelty. I am very curious if we do get through the second book, that if people will be as open as they were the first time, and whether people wanted to be open because they felt it was an interesting privilege to be a part of the book, being part of the book.
Awesome. I have one more question, but if Seema has it, another question, go for it, and then I'll ask, and then we'll close. And your takeaway, obviously, we can have it.
Yeah.
Okay, I go. Now you talked about the book, Richard's book, A Matter of Confidence. So let me see. Am I mute? No. Okay. You have talked about the end of BC Liberals' domination in your book. In the 2017 general election, NDP barely could take over, but in 2020 they won an absolute majority. Rather than their great job, in my opinion, in fighting, like BC Provincial Health, in fighting COVID compared to the other provinces, what else, in your opinion, has played a role in their victory, in this, like, getting an absolute majority?
Yeah, I think general affordability issues. I think people felt they needed a completion to issues around childcare, around public education, investments to transit, continuing the work on ICBC, continuing the work addressing money laundering. And I still think there was a sense of a distrust in the Liberals that, you know, in 2017, there was a lot of people weren't sure what to think of John Horgan. They didn't know much about John Horgan, and they've learned about him and they like him. And I think that's sort of part of it. People wanted this continuation of the work that was being done. And that's why we saw, in combination with COVID, this growth, the party's strength, you know, the seat count grew, you know, to a huge, from 41 to 57. So it's a pretty substantial growth.
Great, thank you.
Awesome. My question is about what I do or did. So ever since 2015, I was kind of helping the NDP in terms of outreach to Farsi-speaking communities, mostly Iranians, and then the Afghan community. And basically, I mean, I like to think that we did really well in terms of bringing that community that was totally abandoned into the mix. But one issue that I keep seeing is visibility for a community like ours. In your opinion, what does it take for a community to be visible and, you know, basically, you know, for them to feel, for them to actually have an influence? And I'm not really speaking like just because we have an Iranians, it means that they're a voting bloc and stuff.
No, I know it is a great question, because part of it is squeaky wheel stuff. Like if you have Iranians who work in the campaign, who help a candidate, and then they bring forward their issues. And as you, like, as I don't want to tell you this, like every Iranian has a different issue that matters to them. You know, it's not just, you just don't care about, you know, car insurance because you're Iranian, and you don't care about childcare because you're South Asian. Like, yeah, that's not how it works. But it's about voters, sure, but it's also about organizers and who has the ears of the decision makers. And you know, I think, and it's about an understanding of expressing community and being vocal to your local elected officials, as well as to your decision makers around, you know, your community, and playing a role in that. And we have some MLAs who do a much better job of bringing in diverse communities through their service, and there's others who are more, you know, I care about the people that vote for me, and if your community has historically not voted for me, then I don't care about you. So part of it is, and it's about younger, you know, it's about young people in different cultures getting involved in politics. I know there are a few Iranians for sure working at the legislature for the NDP, and we see, and that makes a big impact. I think it makes a huge impact. You know, you see people like you working for the premier, working for government, working for an MLA, and it makes you feel that you can contribute as well. And I think that makes a huge difference.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you for acknowledging that. I mean, it was kind of hilarious that the time that we were kind of in the news, I mean, not in your book particularly, but you talked about the issue, and that was the Quick Win scandal. Yeah. There was actually one name that I later learned that, oh shoot, there was an Iranian involved too, Sepide Sarofpour.
Yes, she was involved.
And I don't know, like, I don't know if you tried to have an interview with her, but I mean,
I did, and I've spoken to her a number of times. She was very brave in what she did, but slow. You know, some of it is a little bit unreliable. But it was important, the work that she came forward and brought. You know, she was the leader in bringing forward a lot of those allegations, and whistleblowers are very important in our community, and it helps, you know, shine light on things that we often don't. Trying to remember, because I have spoken to her before, but I can't remember the process of talking to her for the book, because I do remember reaching out to her, but I forget where that ended up. But I've interviewed her and spoken to her a number of times.
Awesome. If there is no other question, let's see what our takeaway should be.
Yeah, like I hope your takeaway is what we spent a lot of time talking about how, you know, as journalists, and it's not just me, I'm the one that's here, but we are working our best in our community to provide good information to people to help get through the pandemic and to better understand your democracy. And that is, you know, why I am here, is to help communicate that there are, you know, human beings behind these decisions that are being made that are so crucially important for us understanding that you can rely and trust the news that you can consume.
Awesome. Can you do me a favor and text me or email me that?
Sorry. Yeah, I can do that for you. I'll do it tomorrow.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Richard. Thank you for those who stayed for.
Oh yeah, it's really kind of you that stayed the whole time. I appreciate that.
Awesome, and hope you stay safe and see you again. Hopefully, after the pandemic, we'll have an in-person session.
Sure, that would be great. Thank you all so much. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.